go. Thanks very much for joining us. Today I was able to join the Premier of Victoria, firstly in Bendigo, to look at the work that emergency services personnel are doing, volunteers as well through the SES, to thank them for their service, but to also look at the quite devastating situation which communities in Victoria are facing at the moment. We also were able to view from a helicopter from the air Rochester, of course a community that has been particularly hard hit, that has seen massive evacuations and tragically has seen a loss of life. 71-year-old Kevin Wills, and my heart goes out in condolences to his family and to his friends. Today we've announced as well at Mickleham, the Commonwealth facility there will be made available with 250 beds for people who've been evacuated from flood affected communities. Part of our commitment in consultation with Victoria, we're working across federal, state and local government in a seamless way to make sure that every support is being provided to these communities that are under such enormous pressure. Today, by the end of today, over 100 ADF personnel will be on the ground here in Victoria, providing support with evacuations, providing support with sandbagging, providing whatever support is required, and will continue to respond positively to further requests. On financial assistance, I can today say, along with my Minister for Emergency Management, Murray Watt, and our Minister for Government Services, Bill Shorten, who of course his electorate has been impacted by this as well, financial support for people affected by southeastern Australian floods. In Victoria, the disaster recovery allowance is available in the 23 local government areas that are impacted. In Tasmania, 17 local government areas are impacted and are eligible for the disaster recovery allowance, and in New South Wales an additional 4 LGAs have been added, unfortunately due to the spread of the impact of this flood event, bringing that number to 31. In addition to that, in recognition of the number of homeowners affected, in particular LGAs, a one-off, non-means tested Australian Government disaster recovery payment of $1,000 per eligible adult and $400 per eligible child is available to people in the Victorian LGAs of Campaspe, Greater Shepparton, Maribyrnong, Mitchell and Strathbogie, and in the Tasmanian LGAs of Central Coast, Kentish and Meander Valley. This support is of course a small compensation, but it does mean that people are getting that support on the ground, and we'll make that available immediately. I've spoken with the Minister, and that information and will be available from this afternoon to ensure that that money can flow immediately. I'll just hand to the Premier of Victoria, but thank him and his team for the way in which we're working together. That's what Australians want at a difficult time, and I pay tribute to the volunteers and the people in these communities who are showing such resilience once again in the face of enormous pressure that they're under. Australians are coming together, they're helping each other out, and once again we're seeing at the worst of times the best of the Australian character.
Thanks very much, Prime Minister, and on behalf of all Victorians can I thank the Prime Minister and his colleagues for the partnership that we have. It's a strong partnership. It's all about keeping people safe, providing relief to people who need it, and then that long, challenging journey of recovery and rebuilding. It's made a little easier by the fact that all governments are working together. So, PM, thank you so much for being here today. And I think nothing beats seeing firsthand and being in important incident control centres like the one at Bendigo today, where you can look people in the eye and ask them whether they have everything. Both the Prime Minister and I did that, and we're very pleased to be able to say that systems are working well, everyone's working together. There's a really positive, although it's a challenging time, but there's a really positive sense of partnership right across all of our agencies. And again, can I join with the Prime Minister in thanking every single member of our career staff, volunteers, and many more beyond who don't necessarily wear a uniform but work very hard in their own local communities to keep people safe. I've got a number of things I want to run through, and then I'm going to hand to Tim Weebush, who will take you through that kind of call of the card right across the state. Obviously, we have taken steps in partnership with the Commonwealth Government to stand up the Mickleham Centre, so the former quarantine centre. It's got 250 beds, and we have done a power of work over recent days in partnership with the Commonwealth so that we can be ready to take residents to move into that facility in the next few days. We'll provide meals to each and every one of those people, 3 meals a day. They'll be able to access healthcare, both physical and mental health care, 24/7. There'll be co-located services like Centrelink and other wraparound services provided by the state government so that families can have everything that they need at a very difficult time. It's a stressful time for kids, we know, and there'll be particular activities and supports that are targeted towards those youngest members of the community impacted by these floods. And we'll also work very hard to provide all the other supports that people might need. Obviously, a roof over your head in this difficult time is very important, but there'll be other things that need hard work, and we'll make sure that we focus on that as well. In terms of families who can't get back into their homes and want to be connected to that, Mickleham as an accommodation option, I'd simply say if you ring 1800 560 760, then we're more than happy to talk you through those options. And indeed, there'll be similar processes on the ground, reaching out into communities where it would seem they're not going to get back home for an extended period. Mickleham becomes a relevant option. Just very quickly, we have 13 relief centres open across the state. We've got 10 aircraft up in the air today doing everything from damage assessments through to providing supplies and important equipment to otherwise isolated communities, doing rescue work as well. Those communities in different locations that are cut off, getting in there and giving people the practical assistance that they need. There remains 55 sandbag collection points across the state. 355 roads remain closed. In more recent developments, we've got about 6,000 properties around the Mooroopna area that are without power. Teams are working as hard as they can, but obviously rising floodwaters there and a real challenge to Kyalla, Mooroopna, Shepparton, Murchison as well. There's a really significant challenge there, just the volume of water and the levels that it's reaching. But Tim will go to that in a moment, but there are 6,000 properties without power, and everyone's doing their level best to get the power back on as quickly as possible and to support those power-dependent residents. On emergency payments, those that we've talked you through these last few days, I can now confirm that there's 9,290 Victorians who have applied for those one-off payments. That's for people who are out of their home. That's for people who need it, whether it be shelter, food, clothing, medicine, all of those very practical things. That process is working well. We're moving staff from different call centres across government. We're moving staff from different departments to process those claims as quickly as we possibly can so that that money is with people who are doing it very tough as fast as possible. I will just again remind people, emergencypayments.dffh.vic.gov.au or 1800 226 226 if you want information and if you want to begin the process of applying for that grant. It's just over $2,000 for eligible families and is all about those very practical matters that people need support with at this time. Now I'm going to ask Tim Weebush to go through a number of different flood-affected communities and update you on what we think the trends are, what's going to happen over these next couple of days, and then we're all of us happy to take any questions that you may have. There's a number of other issues like school, exams, all manner of practical matters waste disposal, all of those sorts of issues. We're going to come back to those most likely tomorrow and try and give you a really clear update on as many of those matters as we can. I just wanted to finish off the top by saying that the government has determined to provide a $500,000 grant as a rapid first step to the 24 local government areas that are affected by these floods. That's $500,000 per local council. That's the first step. There'll be more to come, and there'll be different amounts of money and different programs that are run for many weeks to come. But this is an initial grant of $500,000. We'll waste no time in paying that out, and it's all about making sure that councils who are doing it tough, particularly in those worst affected communities, we don't want finances to be a limiting factor on them being able to step in and provide the care and support, the recovery, and of course the clean-up and rebuilding that we know is so important. Back to the Prime Minister's earlier point, national government, state government, local government, all working together. That's how we keep people safe, and that's how we recover from what is a record-breaking flood event. To talk in more detail about that, I'll now ask Tim Wiebusch to take you through where floods are up to across the state.
Thanks, Premier, and good afternoon, everybody. This flood emergency is far from over in Victoria, and whilst we're seeing some communities that are now into the clean-up and early recovery phase, there are still many communities that are under risk of flood warnings at this time. I'm going to move from west to east across our state to give you a bit of an update on where we are at this present time. So on the Wimmera River in the west of our state, we're expecting a major flood peak of 3.6 metres at Horsham, which is well below the 2011 peak of 4.27 metres. But we will still see 74 properties, the local showgrounds, along with the caravan park and a couple of aged care facilities that will have water in or around them in the coming days. We then move over to the Avoca River. The Charlton Township that we've been talking about for a number of days now has an evacuation warning current. We're expecting a flood peak there of 8 metres today. And that will continue to peak into tomorrow at a level similar to what we saw in 2010, but we're not expecting a flood level that we saw in 2010-11, which was a record flood at that time of 8.6 metres. In Charlton, we're expecting around 80 properties to become under threat of flooding, whether it's both in and around a range of properties in that township. If we then move over onto the Loddon River, we're now starting to see the downstream impacts from Serpentine as it heads towards the Murray River. In particular, the townships of Pyramid Hill and Kerrang will become under threat in these coming days. At Kerrang, we're expecting a peak on Monday into Tuesday before it reaches a higher peak on Tuesday into Wednesday. At Pyramid Hill, there was a community meeting yesterday, and the community is well readied, having sandbagged a range of properties around that location ahead of the peak which is expected into tomorrow. On the Campaspe River, as we know, the Rochester Township has experienced significant inundation, but it is now receding at that location, but we're still expecting major flood levels to be there for another few days. As we head down the Campaspe River to Echuca, Echuca now has an evacuation message out for a number of parts of that community, but also too late to leave coming into play in some locations. We're expecting a peak this afternoon of 96.2 metres at that location, and this will mean that there will be around 1,000 properties that will either be surrounded or some of those inundated by floodwaters. Fortunately, we have good support there for our emergency services from the ADF and other local community groups that have been doing a terrific effort in terms of providing some mitigation through sandbagging and other means in that community. That'll just be the first of 2 peaks for the Echuca community, with the Murray River then coming into play again Monday into Tuesday, where we're expecting a flood peak of around 95 metres, which is above the major flood level. Again, we're expecting a similar amount of properties to be again under threat from that major flood level for at least 3 to 4 days. If we move across then onto the Goulburn River, where it converges with the Broken and Severn and Castles Creek at Shepparton, that is going to be our most significant impact today and into the early hours of tomorrow morning. The Goulburn River last night peaked in around Mooroopna and Shepparton where the causeway was closed, but we're expecting the maximum peak to be around 12.2 metres early tomorrow morning. That's early Monday morning. Earlier this morning we issued emergency warnings saying it was too late to leave if people had not moved to the relief centres at either Chichura or in parts of Shepparton. At 12.2 metres, we're expecting 7,300 properties to be surrounded, or some of those inundated by floodwaters. We could see in the order of 2,500 properties seeing flooding above the floor level. But we are alerting Shepparton residents, Mooroopna residents, Kyalla Lakes and the like to be alert to their conditions in case that continues to rise. If it goes up just another 1.1 of a metre to 12.3 metres, we could see a further 1,600 homes that become under threat of that major flooding. As we move across then to the Broken Creek, the communities north of Shepparton at Numurkah and Nathalia, at this stage the local council is implementing their flood mitigation measure, which is a temporary levy at Nathalia, but at this time all indications are we're only likely to see minor to moderate flooding rather than major flooding. That's quite different to what we saw in 2010-11, where we had the Muckatar Depression and the Broken Creek converging at the same time that caused significant flooding in those communities. So for those communities, we are not expecting those same conditions as we saw in 2010-11, but we are expecting minor to moderate flooding to be occurring. At Seymour, we're still seeing a major flood level where we saw the peak on Friday of 8.26 metres. That's now down to 7.67 metres with the outflows that are still coming out of the Eildon Dam. We're expecting to see that major flooding level to drop away from tomorrow, and that community is very much now into an early recovery mode. If we then go to the south of our state on the Hopkins River, we're seeing two communities there, Panmure and Allensford, that are seeing localised flooding impacts today. Those levels will be 400 to 500 millimetres below, though, what we saw in the 2011 record floods in that area. So those communities have had gatherings this morning at community meetings and are well prepared for this event. The good news at Mount Emu Creek at Skipton is that conditions are continuing to recede there and they're very much into a clean-up and recovery mode at this time. Similarly, at the Barwon River in Geelong, that peaked at 3.85 metres, just below the major flood level, and is now receding. And so those in the caravan parks and the like are no longer under immediate threat of major flooding. But we did see between 15 to 20 local businesses that have been impacted, along with sporting fields and the like in that area. As we go away from here today, we can't emphasise enough that when we issue emergency warnings, we need the community to really look at the action messages that we're providing. We can't afford for people to be attempting to drive through flash flood waters, as the rescues that are occurring are likely to continue to put our emergency services under pressure. We do have specialist capabilities in each of those communities that are under threat today at Echuca, Charlton, also around Shepparton, Mooroopna and Kyalla in particular. But we are expecting over this next week to see further rainfall. The Bureau has indicated that we could see another 20 to 50 millimetres of rain, particularly over the northeast catchments in the later part of next week, but we'll come back to you over the coming days with some more information as that modelling continues to firm up. We're happy to take your questions. Look, we've seen a very good response at the townships of Charlton in particular in terms of heeding those warnings. In Echuca, people are moving well in and around an area that's really quite constricted in terms of roads that are being cut. Echuca is effectively isolated from other parts of Victoria at this time, so people have been moving across into Moama in particular, and we've been working with our New South Wales counterparts about that. Particularly in the township of Shepparton, whilst we've seen some really good movement of people either to family, friends and to the relief centres in Chichura and Shepparton, we are concerned that there are a number of people that have chosen to stay. We're asking them to obviously be within the highest part of their home over these next 48 to 72 hours in particular, while we see that peak flood go through the township of Mooroopna, Shepparton and Kyalla in particular.
You gave estimates of how many people in Echuca need to, or how many houses will be impacted from that Campaspe River flood. Is there any estimates on the Murray River when that peaks next week in Echuca?
Look, at this stage, it's a little bit too early to know the exact numbers, but we're expecting around a similar number, 1,000 to 1,200 properties, that when the Murray River peaks, it's very similar areas that will become under pressure because the Campaspe River will still not have dropped below the moderate flood level coinciding with that major flood peak on the Murray River.
How many people are you aware of that are choosing to stay? Is it hundreds?
Look, we believe there are hundreds of people that have chosen for one reason or another to stay in their homes. That is their choice. I guess we had been appealing to people to move to family, friends and to relief centres for quite some time, but it is now unsafe and too late to leave.
This may be a question for the place for the Premier, but is there a reason why more beds at Mickleham haven't been opened? Is there an estimate that 250 beds will be enough for everyone who requires them?
250 is the initial, and there's a capacity to open another 250. So this has never been used for this purpose before, so we have to wait and see what sort of demand there'll be. And look, it won't be for everybody, it's an option. But the key point with this event, unlike other flood events, is because of just how sodden the ground is, just how full the catchments are, just how significant a rainfall event we've just been through with more rain to come. These peaks, even once they recede off the high mark, there's still going to be water in these communities and houses that are just not inhabitable for extended periods of time. So for some people, the notion of coming to Mickleham, being well cared for, being able to focus on your well-being while the clean-up happens, while waters recede, the passage of time is going to be really important with this, particularly as we see more and more rain, not just this week, but rain being a feature of the next month or two. So it won't be for everybody, but it will be a really important additional tool that's not been available to us before, and we'll have to see if the first 250 beds are used, then we will open up the second. As I said, it's a tool that's not been available to us previously.
Can you just explain how people will go about making their way?
People won't have to make their own way. We will, as best as we can, we'll provide buses, we'll provide other transport options for people to get there. So we want to make this as seamless as possible. And as I said, it's an option. It's not mandatory. It's not something that everybody will choose to do. For instance, there's very important relief centres have been stood up at the Bendigo Showgrounds today. That's all about supporting communities, whether it be from Rochester, from Echuca as well. There's lots of different options for people, but this is one that's not been available to us previously. We'll make it as easy, as seamless as we can possibly make it. And buses there's already a fair bit of work gone into making sure. Yes, they do. Or they speak to the relief centre that they're already in contact with. And we'll take it from there and provide people with all the support they need. So you'll be fed, you'll be well taken care of, health services, other government services are there for you. We'll look after your kids. It is an option that's not been available to us previously, and I think people will take it up. We're talking about many hundreds, indeed it may well be thousands of people who are out of their homes through no fault of their own. It's either isolation or there's water over the floor. They'll be out while we do an enormous amount of work cleaning up in partnership with the Commonwealth.
Premier, on the amount of time people might be away from their homes, we've spoken to people that said once floodwaters come in, you have to get rid of everything for us in your houses, the floorboards, the skirts, the carpet.
Yep.
There's obviously not enough tradies and materials for everybody to do this at the same time. So is there support or any, representations you've made to other states or the Insurance Council we spoke about yesterday to try and make sure people can get this repair work done? Sure.
So we've spoken to the Insurance Council, we've spoken to the banks. We're in constant communication and partnership with the Commonwealth Government and its agencies. There are grants, there are different phases, and we move from obviously the active flood, and that's all about safety, and then we move and providing relief, and then we move into a recovery rebuild phase. And we'll have more announcements to make over coming days about, for instance, the government stepping in and having some lead or head contractor arrangements, as we have done in previous floods and more recently in terms of fire. Those grants to local government that I just announced are all about them being able to do what they need to do around clean-up. This is going to be a massive task. Some of it will fall to local government as well as us and the federal government. other elements of this, people will take responsibility for their own property, but they'll need support, they'll need assistance, and not everybody will be able to do that. There'll be a range of people who simply won't be able to do even the bits that a homeowner might do, let alone tradespeople. And you're right, there'll be significant shortages of the skills and expertise that we need. That's why working together is so important. That's why providing people with options to be housed elsewhere, particularly vulnerable people, to be housed elsewhere while we get that work done for them is a really important development.
And on those floods,
But I hope to have more to say tomorrow about a whole series of different programs, everything from waste and landfill and those sorts of issues, all the way through to some of the other supports we'll provide to those who've been hardest hit.
And on those floods on the Maribyrnong, there is still anger and questions being asked about the impact that the flood wall around Flemington may have had.
Sure.
You said yesterday that it would come to Melbourne Water.
Yes, I can confirm that Melbourne Water will conduct a thorough review of this flood event and any impact that wall had on this flood event. They'll do that work at arm's length from the government, and they'll report progress. Any other issues?
On the infrastructure.
Sure.
Money
Me or the PM? It's the Prime Minister's. Yes, that's probably a good place to start.
Can I just, before we move off the immediate, just say that as of about a couple of minutes' time, the system will be available for online claiming of the disaster payment for 24/7 through my.gov.au, and we have an Australian Government Emergency Information line 1802266, and that's available from 2 o'clock as well today. I think Annika or on this. Sure.
Sorry, do you have a rough, it might be more question for the Premier, rough idea of how many people across Victoria have been impacted? You keep sort of singling out numbers by communities, but just an overarching number.
Well, we've got 9,000 people who believe themselves eligible to apply for that one-off payment. Their payments to people who are out of their home, either because their home's been flooded or their home is isolated because of flood water. We may have some multiples in there, but once we reconcile those numbers, we'll get them to you. And I think they have been double-checked, but we'll triple-check them. Obviously, that number's going to continue to grow. So we're certainly talking about thousands of people in communities right across regional Victoria and some even in metropolitan Melbourne who are out of their home, and we will stand with them and support them to get through this initial phase. Then we'll move to clean up, and today's announcements of support for those 24 councils, very, very important. We don't want finances to be in any way limiting the care and support that we provide to those who are doing it really tough. And those grants are a first. There'll be subsequent steps that we take, and we'll have more to say tomorrow. But it's certainly thousands and thousands of people that are out of their home, and we can be absolutely certain, sadly, that in places like Shepparton, places like Echuca and others, these waters are going to continue to rise, and more homes are going to be flooded. That's why there are important evacuation efforts going on right now in a number of different places.
Just as a clarification, when you say people out of their homes, does that include people who perhaps evacuated when they were told to by SES, have returned later, floodwaters didn't come in, but they have had to pay for alternative accommodation over that night?
Yes, so if you're out of your home because you've been flooded, or because your home's been cut off, or indeed if you have been out of your home due to the flood event, so listening to advice, then yes, you'd be eligible, and we make it as easy as possible for people to claim these funds. It's not a time to be going through 20 different hoops in order to get the money. We're trying to make this as easy as possible, as seamless as possible. We want to encourage people when you're told to leave. That's exactly what we would ask you to do. That advice is carefully considered, and it is offered with only one purpose, and that's to keep you safe and to prevent somebody else having to come and rescue you, because it's very dangerous for them as well.
Some Maribyrnong locals today saying their $600 payments were already rejected. They did evacuate.
I'm happy to get advice on that for you.
It might be a bit early, but an issue that came up in northern New South Wales post floods, polling booths and things like that were sort of not available for a lot of communities because of the floods. We are about to come into a state election and a pre-poll opens in a number of weeks. Have you thought about what might be available to those people who might impact in those communities?
I'd be very confident that the Victorian Electoral Commission will have a range of contingencies. Those plans will be particularly well developed, given that this rain has been forecast for quite some time. And just like SES and EMV and all of our emergency services family have been doing lots of work these last few months, I'd be pretty confident that the Electoral Commission's done the same. But we can have someone come back to you from the VEC.
Well, the review you mentioned earlier look into the late notification for people around Maribyrnong, some believe that they will be notified as soon as Melbourne.
No, this is Melbourne Water will review the wall issue in terms of notifications, door knocking, the footprint for text messages. Tim went through all of that in quite some detail yesterday, I think it was. And I want to thank all of those volunteers and all of those career staff who are out there trying to make sure the community knew. I was just speaking with the Bureau, Kevin from the Bureau, and their forecasting has been very, very accurate, and we were just commenting that it was good that we stood up on Tuesday to give people as much warning as possible. But as to exactly what occurred in that Maribyrnong area, Tim took all of us through that in some detail. We're happy to get you further timelines and details, but the total footprint of activity, warning activity, was, as I understand it, well beyond the houses that were in fact flooded. We have to support those families, and we will. And as for any grants that have not been processed, I'm happy to chase that up as well. Nothing else for me. You can talk about infrastructure and talk to a Prime Minister who keeps his promises, which is very good.
Anna?
Prime Minister, you have promised $2.2 billion for suburban rail loop. That's less than what the Victorian government wanted overall that you will contribute. Are you waiting for the Infrastructure Australia full assessment before you do that? And do you know when we can expect that?
We promised $2.2 billion and we'll deliver $2.2 billion in our first budget. I made it very clear when I've stood with the Premier on a number of occasions about this exciting project. Frankly, it's a nation-building project for Victoria. It will transform the way that people get around this city. One of the things that I know is that when Infrastructure Australia have done assessments about particularly our East Coast capitals, they were confronted with the same problem in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, which was a problem at the centre, at the core of the system. Now in Melbourne, it's been dealt with the Melbourne Metro project, which we had substantial money in the budget for that was withdrawn and cut by the first Abbott government budget. That's a pity because there was even a federal person on the board that was established, and we worked with both the Labor and the coalition government here in Victoria to deliver that project. The next step of avoiding going into the centre and out, the hub and spoke approach that Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane all suffered from, is suburban rail loop. Why should you have to go into the city to then go out again? This will make an enormous difference to productivity. It's very much a commitment that we've given of $2.2 billion because we know that this is an exciting project. Infrastructure Australia will continue to work with the Victorian government, not just on that, but on a range of other projects as well. We committed to the Camerons Lane interchange at Beveridge, and we'll provide the funding of $150 million there. That's a growing community there in the northern suburbs that I went to and made that commitment along with the federal member and the local council as well as the state, and of course Bowen Heads Road upgrade as well. The next stage of that will also be funded in the budget. But we'll continue to work with the Victorian government, as we will with every state and territory government. Infrastructure Australia, essentially the model that said the money should go to the most productive areas, as a model that unfortunately was undermined by the former government. They did keep Infrastructure Australia there. They just politicised the board and politicised the processes and undermined it. We'll continue to do that, and I look forward to building on the $2.57 billion of new commitments for Victorian infrastructure that we'll deliver.
Prime Minister, the opposition leader Matthew Guy said today that he would be keen to have a conversation with you if he appears to take this in November about repurposing money that promised to suburban rail loop. Would you be open to that conversation?
No, it's a commitment for the suburban rail loop. We make commitments to specific projects at specific times, very clearly. The sort of nonsense that we've seen from the sort of interchange that went on, whereby money was so-called kept in lock boxes and all this sort of nonsense. You won't have that from my government. What you'll have is straight commitments, straight delivery, real funding for real projects that will make a real difference to people's lives. I'm absolutely convinced that suburban rail loop will do just that. Thanks very much.